Thank you very much, Mr. Majila, for this opportunity. And thank you also for that very generous introduction. As you said, today I will speak about sampling, but not only about sampling, I'll also speak about like data gathering, especially the qualitative interviews. So I wanted to make, as we discussed earlier on before we went live, the aim of today is just to try and make the presentation or the workshop as practical as possible, because I know a lot of our students are really struggling with methodology. Methodology just sounds foreign until you start doing the work on the field. I also struggled, obviously, as a student. And before I actually start with the presentation, I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Professor Ngulube, the director of the College of Graduate Studies, for the invitation. He's actually the one who invited me to come and speak at this workshop, or to facilitate this workshop. Thank you very much, Prof, for the opportunity. Okay, before any further ado, I will start. Like I said, I'll speak about sampling, then I'll move to data gathering, and then I'll speak a little bit about your qualitative interviews. So basically, sampling is a quantity that represents a whole or a population. The intention of a sample is to show you what a whole of a population or a population looks like. So we draw a sample in research because it is in most cases, it is not feasible to study an entire population. And that is why we have to draw a sample to represent the population. I mean, just take South Africa, for example. If you want to study something related to our country, it is not going to be feasible for you to study the entire population. And that is why you have to choose a sample from the country that's going to represent the population. So two things are very important, or three things are important when it comes to sampling. First of all, just remember this through our presentation of sampling. Your sampling technique or your method, and your sampling size, and the unit of analysis. Just keep that in mind as I go along with the presentation. So the first thing that we'll speak about is your different types of your sampling techniques. So before you decide on which sampling method to use, remember your research aims and your objectives, or what you are planning to achieve at the end of your research, is supposed to be directing you. So you can't just choose a sample just because you think this one is nice, or looks nice, or sounds nice, but your objectives need to give you a direction on which kind of a sample you're going to use. So there's two different types, mainly, in your conservative research: probability sampling and non-probability sampling. So right now we'll speak about the probability methods, or your probability sampling. We've got 4 different main types. There are other types, but I'm going to speak about only 4 subtypes today, which is your simple random sampling, your stratified sampling, your systemic sampling, and your cluster sampling. Systematic, not systemic. Sorry, I'll fix that before you circulate, Mr. Machila. So probability sampling basically means that the chances of each member of the population being chosen to become part of the study are equal. And you probably have heard already, or have learned, that probability sampling is mostly used in quantitative studies. But like I said, these sampling methods can actually be used like in different types of studies, depending on what your objective is. So they are not really cast in stone. So if you are doing qualitative research, don't be scared and think, oh, I can't use probability methods. No, you can use probability as long as you are able to motivate why you've chosen probability. So everything that you choose, every single method or methodology that you choose for your research, as long as you are able to motivate and your reasons are understandable and your reasons are in line with your objectives, then you are good to go with whatever methodology that you have chosen. So the first one, under probability methods, we have the simple random sampling. So to conduct this type of a sample, you can use tools like random number generators or other techniques that are based entirely on chance. Like I usually use an example of putting numbers in a hat. I know that's like very old-fashioned because the computer can actually generate numbers for you. But just to simplify it, when you think about this sampling method, think about you putting numbers out of a hat. Let's say you are studying an organization of 1,000 people, but you can't study all 1,000 people, the entire population. But you want to choose a sample of 100 people, 10% from that population. What you do, you put numbers 1 to 1,000 in your head, and then you obviously select numbers randomly, like obviously pick out numbers until 100 from that head. But nowadays, there's like, systems in the computer that can help you to generate random numbers and all of that. So you don't have to do it the old-fashioned way, like I've just explained now. So I just wanted to simplify it. And then the second one, you've got your stratified sampling. So this sampling method is appropriate when the population has mixed characteristics. And you want to ensure that every characteristic is proportionally represented in the sample. So you basically divide your sample into subgroups or what we call strata based on the relevant characteristics. Let's say you look at your characteristics at gender, age, income bracket, job role, etc. So let's say, for example, you are studying in Unisa, you want to look at how your lecturers are supporting you in Unisa or administrative support where Unisa is concerned. We already have like different departments in Unisa, so you can call those your strata, and then you choose, instead of like studying the entire Unisa, then you can just choose the different departments that you want to focus on, your strata, and then you study those. So basically, from the overall proportions of the population, you calculate how many people you should be sampled from each subgroup. Then you use a random or systematic sampling to sample from each subgroup. So like the example that I made about Unisa, you will obviously decide ahead of time that how many Unisa colleagues or how many Unisa staff members do you want to interview or do you want to be part of your sample. And then from the population, you choose the numbers from your strata. You choose the numbers with either systematically or randomly, like the previous, you can use the previous sampling method to choose randomly. And then we've got systematic sampling, not systemic, so we'll fix that. It's systematic sampling. So this sampling method is similar to sample random sampling, the one that I discussed at the beginning, but it is slightly, usually easier to conduct. So every member of the population is listed with a number. But instead of randomly generating numbers like we did where the simple random sampling is concerned, individuals are chosen at irregular intervals. So I'm going to use Unisa. I'm going to keep on using Unisa as an example of your population. So, for example, your population is all employees of Unisa are listed in an alphabetical order. So from the first 10 numbers, you randomly select a starting point. Let's say you've got 1,000 Unisa staff members. Obviously, then you give each of us a number. Tony is number 1, I'm number 1,000. And then what you do is that you choose, you can either start selecting your sample from 1 or from 10. And then from wherever you're starting to select, let's say you are starting to select from 1. Then you'll choose Mr. Majila, he's number 1. Then you decide that, okay, from him, you are going to jump 9 people in between, and your next one will be number 10. So meaning that from number 10, you're going to choose number 20. From number 20, you're going to choose 30. And, until you get your sample that you're looking for. So basically, every 10th person on the list is selected, and you end up with a sample of 100 for if that's the sample that you are looking for. And then we've got a cluster sampling, which is the last one under probability methods. So cluster sampling also involves dividing the population into subgroups, but each subgroup should have similar characteristics to the whole sample. Instead of sampling individuals from each subgroup, you randomly select entire subgroups. Let's go back to Unisa again as a population. Unisa has many departments. You've got me, I come from the Department of Criminology and Security Science. You've got people coming from, the Department of Education. So let's say, let's use our college, for example, the College of Law, but you only want to study the School of Criminal Justice, and this is where I come from. Or you want to study the entire College of Law. Let's say the entire College of Law. But the College of Law has a lot of departments, and you can't study all the departments. And we've got two schools, the School of Criminal Justice and the School of Law. So then you choose, you're like, okay, from the School of Criminal Justice, I'm going to take the Department of Criminology and Security Science. We've got 3 departments under that school. So we are assuming that the department that you are choosing, which is Criminology and Security Science, has the same characteristics as the other 2 departments, which is the Department of Police Practice and the Department of Correctional Management. So for example, when I speak characteristics, we're speaking gender. We are assuming that we've got female colleagues at Department of Criminology and Security Science, and we also have female colleagues in the other 2 departments. We are assuming that we've got colleagues living with disabilities in the Department of Criminology and Security Science, and probably in the other 2 departments, we've got colleagues with living with disabilities. We've got male colleagues and all of that. So we are assuming that the characteristics in the departments are the same, and that is why we can choose only one cluster to represent the rest of the departments. And then you do the same under the School of Law. You say, I'm not going to study all the departments under the School of Law, but I'll choose mercantile law, for example. And then you assume that the same characteristics that are represented in mercantile law are also represented in the other departments, like your Department of Jurisprudence, etc. So this method is really good for dealing with large and dispersed populations. But there's a more risk of error in the sample, as there could be substantial differences between the clusters. Let's use the colleagues living with disabilities, for example. It could be possible that not all the departments under the College of Law have colleagues living with disabilities. So that is where the error occurs, because then it is not a true representative of the entire population, because maybe the cluster that you have chosen does not have colleagues living with disabilities. So it's difficult to guarantee that the sampled clusters are really representative of the whole population. But remember, where research is concerned, you don't have to stress yourself and say, oh my goodness, there aren't people living with disabilities, so this sample is not representative. Remember what I said in the beginning. As long as you can motivate, substantiate whatever method that you are using, and your reasons are reasonable enough and understandable enough, then you are good to go. So your sampling will never be perfect. Your research will never be perfect, but as long as you are able to provide substantial reasons for whatever decisions that you are making, then you are fine. So that's basically probability sampling. The next one that we are going to be looking at is your non-probability methods. And I'll be discussing the three different types. There are more types, but for the purpose of this workshop, we're only going to be discussing 3. Like probability sampling, non-probability is said to be mostly used for qualitative research, basically because that not all members of the population have an equal chance of being selected to become part of the study, or of the study, yes. But like I said, with probability methods also, that if you feel that you can use non-probability methods more efficiently in your research, even if it's quantitative, substantiate your reasons. So the methods are not cast in stone. whatever that is suitable for your research, use that within reason, obviously. So the first one that we'll discuss under this, under non-probability sampling methods, is your convenience sampling. So a convenience sample simply includes the individuals who happen to be most accessible to the researcher. This is a very easy and inexpensive way to gather initial data, but there is no way to tell if the sample is representative of the population. So it can't produce generalizable results. So you can't generalize results when you are using convenience sampling. So an example of how to conduct a convenience sample is that like now there is a number of students who are available in this, who are attending this workshop. So you are conducting your research and you're like, you know what, this is an opportunity. There's 100 Unisa students in this workshop. So what you do is that maybe your research topic is Unisa's support to the students during COVID-19. And you want to find out the opinions of your colleagues or your students. What you do is that then you will use these 100 students who are in this workshop to do your research. That is convenience sampling. So the students are conveniently available to you because you are at the same place at the same time. Then you choose this particular sample to represent your whole or your population, which is the Unisa student population. And then your next one would be your purposive sampling. Purposive is self-explanatory. You choose people to be part of your sample on purpose. So you use your judgment as a researcher. You're saying, okay, my topic is police brutality, for example. So I need to choose people on purpose who have knowledge on the topic at hand. And you're thinking, okay, who best knows or understands police brutality? And you're thinking, okay, the Unisa Department of Police Practice studies, police-related matters. So I'm going to interview colleagues from the Unisa Department of Police Practice because they are knowledgeable on the subject. So you use your judgment. You use your judgment based on the characteristics that you require for your research. You use your judgment based on the person having the knowledge of your research topic. So that's your purposive sampling. And then also, where your qualitative research is concerned, you use purposive sampling where you want to gain detailed knowledge about a specific phenomena rather than make a statistical inference or generalization. Like I explained earlier on that, with convenience sampling, you cannot generalize your findings. So that's mostly in qualitative research, findings cannot be generalized because the sampling in qualitative research is not as big as the sampling in the sample size. Is not as big as your quantitative research. So, but I'll explain sample size as we go on. And so an effective purposive sample must have a clear criteria and rationale for inclusion. Remember, you have to have rationale for everything. You have to be able to explain why your sample must be the Unisa Department of Police Practice, or maybe your sample must be the South African Police Services, your detectives, for example. You explain why the detectives must be the ones that are being interviewed for your research. So rationale is very important and criteria is very important. Make it very clear. In your research proposal, in your research dissertation or thesis, you need to write as if your readers or your markers or your examiners don't even know anything about research. So be as detailed as possible and explain why the type of methodology or methods that you are using are appropriate for your specific research. And then the next one that we have, it's a snowball sampling. So where the snowball sampling is concerned, it's usually used for a population that is hard to access. So snowball sampling can be used to recruit participants via other participants. So I usually use in our field of criminal justice or criminology, we work with the correctional services as well. And as Mr. Machila explained in my bio, I am one of my research areas is cash and transit heist. So for my master's dissertation, I've had to go into the correctional services, correctional centers. So I had to go to 6 different correctional centers. So in our field, the correctional population or your offenders are classified as a hard to access population. Mainly because, gaining access into correctional centers is very difficult, super difficult. And those of you who are going to be conducting your research in such places, in correctional services, for example, you need to be prepared for such. You need to be prepared when you are doing your research proposal. You must already anticipate the difficulties that you are going to experience in gaining access to your sample. It's not always easy to gain access to your sample. So your correctional services are classified as your hard to access population. So what happened when I was doing my master's research on cash and transit robberies, I wrote to the correctional services after I received my ethical clearance, obviously from Unisa College of Law. I applied and then I gained access. They gave me permission. I went in and I wanted to interview people who committed cash and transit heists. But the challenge was that correctional services or the courts, when they are convicting people who are guilty of cash and transit robberies, there is no crime type called CIT. They convict them for robbery aggravating circumstances. And there's different types of robbery aggravating circumstances. So I get into the correctional services. At one of the centers, for example, there were 1,700 offenders who were convicted for robbery aggravating circumstances. I get there, I get given a list, and they're like, okay, you have to sift through this list in order for you to be able to draw your sample. Go through the list, and I'm like, oh my goodness. The list doesn't always also explain what the offender has been convicted for. So there's like a few where you read and you'll be like, no, this guy was definitely convicted for cash and transit heist. What also helped is that I went into the centers already knowing who are the kingpins, of cash and transit heist, who are already convicted and all of that. So as I went into the centers, when I was able to see their names on the list, and I was like, okay, I'm definitely looking for this guy. So obviously, I also needed help from the correctional officers because they know the population better to tell me that, oh, okay, I think I remember this and that person committed cash and transit heist. So once you are able to find at least 1 or 2 people, so once I was able to find 1 or 2 people from the list of 1,000 and something people, then I called those people in for an interview. I interviewed them, and then when I was done or during the interview, I asked them to refer other colleagues or fellow perpetrators who committed cash and transit heists. So that was the only way I was able to gain access to other participants who committed the same kind of a crime. So then it snowballs, just like that. I interview this person, I ask them for a referral. They refer 1 or 2 people. I interview the 1 or 2 people. Then I ask the 1 or 2 people to also refer people. They refer. I was even able to get referrals of, their gang members who were convicted, but they were serving their sentences in different correctional centers. So if I knew that I was going to Johannesburg when I was done at Hoshimampuru, then I would ask, I'd be like, okay, do you know anybody in Johannesburg who's also committed a cash and transit heist? Then they'd be like, okay, in my group when I was convicted, we were 15. So these were the people who committed the crime with me. As far as I remember, this and that person is at the center. And also remember, because the correctional population is also not stable. You find that this person was convicted and he was, sentenced to serve their sentence in this prison. and then a year later they get moved, they go to a different correctional center. So, and that is why it's such a hard to access population. So I'm telling you all of these and giving you examples so that you don't get a shock of your life when you go on the field and you're thinking it was going to be easy for you to be able to access your sample in the correctional center, for example. And where access is concerned, this is where it is very, very important for you to have very good relationships with your gatekeepers. So your correctional heads, for example, your heads of security in the correctional services, you need to have very great relationships with the sample or the population which you are going to be studying. If you don't have good relationships, then you are going to fail dismally, because these people are supposed to be helping you around in the population in order for you to be able to draw your sample, in order for you to be able to navigate your way around. So focus on building great relationship with your gatekeepers. I always say that you need to be humble. Humility is going to take you a long way where research is concerned. So remember, relationships, relationships, relationships. All right, and then the next one, we are going to focus on sampling size or your sample size. So people usually say size does not matter, but no, in research, size does matter. So just to explain this a bit, I did say earlier on that your sampling size in quantitative and qualitative research will not be the same. In quantitative, because we want to get statistics, we want numbers, we want to generalize your findings, your sampling size will usually be much bigger. You'll find that people are doing interviews with 1,000, not interviews, surveys with 1,000 people. That's usually quantitative sampling or quantitative research. But for qualitative, you cannot have a sample of 1,000 people. Because, also just think about the methods that you are going to be using also to collect the data. In qualitative research, we want in-depth information. We want rich information. So you'll mostly, sorry, let me just take a sip of my tea. So where qualitative research is concerned, you then have to have a smaller sample, because think about doing open-ended interviews where you want people to explain stuff, where you want to find out about the how. So you want people to elaborate on their answers, and you basically just want as much information as possible from the person. It would be impossible for you to do qualitative interviews with 1,000 people. It cannot be done. So remember feasibility. So, but you can do interviews for quantitative research, but they are not going to be the same as qualitative research. Your interviews for your quanti will be more closed-ended. You're just going to ask this, you'll use like a Likert scale, for example, where a person chooses good, like very good, good, neutral, very bad, bad. That's an example of a Likert scale. You'll use yes or no. So that's feasible, because it's just about you are just ticking, So what I did also in the correctional services when I was doing my research on CITs, the method that I used was mixed method, which we are not necessarily delving into today. So I needed to also do quantitative research with the prisoners or the offenders. So I could not give them the surveys to complete them, and then I leave and come back to collect them. Like I said, correctional services is a very difficult environment to be able to navigate through. So obviously, I needed to do my research on that day when I was seeing my participants and finish. So there's no time to be going back and forth where correctional services is concerned. You'll go today, you go back tomorrow, you find that offender is no longer there. They've been transferred to another correctional center. So then I did the qualitative interviews, which were more open. And then when I was done with the qualitative interviews, instead of letting the offenders fill in the surveys themselves, I did an interview for the surveys. So I helped them like to fill them in. I read the questions to them and then they gave me the answers like yes or no, most likely, and then I just tick it for them. But under a normal circumstance where the population is not hard to find, you can give people surveys, distribute the surveys, and say, I'll come back in a week's time to collect them if you are using, hard copy and not the link, for people to complete online. But in correctional services, that's not something that you can do. So that's your sampling. Like I said, your research methodology will determine the size. If it's qualitative, it will be smaller. If it's quantitative, it will be bigger. So the question that a lot of students also ask where sampling is concerned is that when do I know that I've got enough people to take part or to participate in my study? There is no answer, especially for qualitative research. So qualitative research, we usually say that you stop when you have reached data saturation. So I can't tell you that you must interview 5 people or 10 people. It doesn't work like that with qualitative research. I know we usually want to like predict or forecast in your research proposal, because your proposal obviously is your map or your roadmap for your research path. So you can make predictions in your research proposal. When I did that same research in the correctional services, initially, I think in my research proposal, I said that I wanted to interview 20 offenders, but I ended up interviewing 40 offenders, so double the number that I predicted or double the number that I wanted as a sample. Sometimes you may say I'm going to do 40 and you end up doing 20. When you go on the field, a lot changes. So a research proposal as you have it now, the research proposal that has been approved, the ones who have already submitted their research proposals, it is not going to look the same when you are on the field. It is less likely that what you wrote on the proposal will be exactly what you are going to do. And this is why you need to be extremely flexible as a researcher. So data saturation, basically where qualitative research is concerned, it means that as you conduct your interviews, you get to a point where you are not getting new information. So if you are conducting interviews with Unisa students about the support that they are receiving from Unisa during COVID-19, and all you are getting from the students is about the issues of data or of internet or all of that, all the interviews that you are getting after a certain number are repeating the same thing, then no new information is being discovered any longer. So when you are no longer discovering new information in your interviews, then you have reached data saturation. Then you can stop with your sample. So let's say you are at number 20 or number 23, and you just realize that, from participant number 19, I've basically been getting the same information. Then you decide, I'm stopping at 23 because I'm no longer getting any new information. That's your data saturation. Quantitative, it's a little bit complicated because different people believe different things. They'll tell you that statistically you must have like 10% of your population. So there is no rule. It's also not cast in stone. You need to select as many people as possible. So you can't have 5 people participating in your research and call it qualitative. No, it's not. Quantitative. It is not quantitative. Quantitative, we are speaking big numbers. We are speaking hundreds. We are speaking 500. Like much larger numbers. So unlike quali, where you've got fewer numbers. But like I said, even with quantitative, there is no number that is cast in stone. Your research, your population will drive you. As long as you are able to provide reasons why 80 people for your research is considered quantitative. So you will explain that out of a population of so many people, I chose 80, and you give your reasons to substantiate the method or your size for your sample size. So I spoke about units of analysis as a third thing or as a third feature of sampling. Okay, it is not in the slides, but I'm just going to talk through it just for less than a minute or so. So a unit of analysis is basically specific people within the population or within the sample that you want to study. So let's say using the very same example of like doing your research in correctional services. When you go to correctional services, you can either study, for example, your correctional officers or your officials. You can study documents if you're doing document analysis, or you can study offenders. So there's like different samples that you can actually study or populations that you can study within the correctional services. But in my specific study on cash and transit robberies, my unit of analysis was offenders. So I didn't study the officials or the head of correctional centers or the regional managers or all the other units that are available in that population. So you need to choose like a specific unit of analysis that this will be my focus. If you are studying Unisa, for example, and you say, no, I'm not studying administrative staff members, but I want to interview academics, then academics are your unit of analysis. So you need to choose your unit of analysis. And also, where sampling is concerned, you also need to remember what I said in the beginning when I was explaining what sampling is. A sample represents a whole. So if you are doing like correctional services, for example, and you are on a master's level, you're not doing your PhD. I didn't study all the correctional centers in the country. I studied only the correctional centers in Gauteng. So you also need to delineate your area, and say, I'm not studying the entire country because it's not feasible. Feasibility is very important when sampling is concerned. Do what is feasible, And as a student, sometimes, like some of you have to study, you have to like finance your studies from your own pocket. There's a lot of traveling concerned where collecting data is concerned. I had to like basically drive in between the different correctional centers. I had to do 6. So you can imagine I drove like to different areas. I had to pay for my own petrol, my own transport. So you need to do what is feasible where your means are concerned. So yeah, so your unit of analysis, like I said, use a specific subgroup and don't necessarily study everyone in that population. So like I said earlier, that I'm also going to take you through data collection methods, but I'm going to focus on like interviewing or qualitative data collection methods. I decided to also focus on this for this workshop because like I said, I was like speaking to Mr. Machila earlier on, and we're saying, what, research is actually quite easy, but it's very difficult when you are doing it theory. But when you are doing it in practice, you get to understand what the theory is all about. And when we also teach and use examples and use research that we've done previously, then it's very easy for you to understand, oh, okay, so this is basically what sampling means, or this is what I need to do when I go on the field. So this part that I'm going to present is when you are ready to go onto the field to do your qualitative research data collection. But this also applies for quantitative, what I'll be talking about now. So when I was in university, when I was doing my honors degree at a university close to Unisa, we had this lecturer, we used to call her Tani, Professor Pretorius. And she used to tell us that poor preparation leads to poor performance. I've never ever forgotten this, ever since she taught me this at honors level. Poor preparation leads to poor performance. You will perform poorly in your research if you do not prepare. Preparation is extremely important where research is concerned. So do not rush. Like if you are at proposal level, don't rush to finish your proposal because you want to move on to the next stage, to the dissertation level. When your supervisor says that you have to redo your proposal, don't be angry with your supervisor and say you are wasting my time. If your supervisor feels that no, instead of you doing the proposal in a year, you are not ready, you're going to have to do it in another year, then it's going to be 2 years. It's for, your best, because foundation is very important. You can see there I've got a picture of a house and the foundation is highlighted in red. Remember, just like when you are building a house, you cannot build a house on a weak foundation. You have to have a very strong foundation in order for your house to survive the storms and all of that. So your research proposal is very important. Although it's not cast in stone, because when you get onto the field, things change. You need to be flexible, like I said. You need to think on your toes, you know. When I went into the field for this cash and transit robbery study, I started off by thinking that it was going to be a qualitative research. I went onto the field and then I was like, it cannot be qualitative. Then I had to use mixed method. So you can change when you are on the field, but remember the most important thing, because remember you already have ethical clearance. So you can't change now and say, okay, I don't want to study male offenders any longer. I want to study female offenders. You can change as long as you are sticking to the same population that you said that you are going to study. If you are saying that you are going to study male correctional centers, stick to the male correctional centers. But you can change, like maybe you get there, you're thinking, okay, purposive sampling doesn't work. I thought I was going to use purposive, but now I must use snowballing. You change, you use snowballing. Okay, qualitative research doesn't work. I'm going to have to do mixed method. Then you add the quantitative part. But what you have to do also, you have to reapply or notify your ethics office that, you know what, I got into the field and this is what happened. So I need you to give me a new ethical clearance. So what happens, I know this is what happens in the College of Law, that if your research subject or your objectives have not really changed, you don't have to like start from scratch to apply for ethical clearance. They basically just update. You notify them and then they just update your ethical clearance. But if you are going to take like a different direction, that's where you have to start your ethics application from scratch. So remember, poor preparation leads to poor performance. Plan, plan, plan. Planning is very important. You can't go on the field without a plan. You can't conduct your research without a plan. You need to plan. If you don't prepare, then you are definitely going to fail, or your performance is going to be very poor. So your foundation is very important, and that is your research proposal. And so like I said, I'll be speaking obviously more about quantitative and qualitative data collection methods. So we've got mixed method also, which obviously I'm not speaking about today. And also I will focus a bit more on qualitative research collection, data collection methods instead of quantitative methods. So under quantitative, the examples that I have is your experiments, your surveys, and your interviews. Remember earlier on I said you can conduct interviews for quantitative research, but the difference is that this one will be structured. They are going to be closed-ended questions. And as opposed to the interviews for qualitative research are not the same as interviews for quanti. So the interviews for quali will be more open-ended. You want people to explain, you want people to reflect, you want people to tell you more about a certain phenomenon. And then the other methods that we have for quali, you've got observations, focus groups, and document analysis. So I just want to take you through some like semi-structured interviews. The 4 Ps, I'm going to repeat the 4 Ps again here. And I'll take you back. Poor preparation leads to poor performance. Before you conduct your interviews, if you are at the moment, you are listening and you are getting ready to do your semi-structured interviews or your data collection, remember to prepare. So the first thing that you need to do in preparation before you go out to do your interviews, make contact with your interviewee or the people you are going to interview to explain the purpose of the study. Remember, part of the planning included you getting your ethical clearance. Obviously, you cannot go on the field without ethical clearance from your college. You get ethical clearance. After getting ethical clearance, you also need to know the place where you are going to be conducting research, or your organization where you are going to be conducting research. What processes do you have to follow in that organization in order for you to be able to conduct research in their organization? With the correctional services, for example, you go on their website, they've got different forms for research. So you have to complete their forms to request for permission. They also have like deadlines. Their research ethics committee sits, I think, about 3 to 4 times in a year. But obviously, because of COVID-19, I don't know how that's being done this year. Obviously, also we can't go into the correctional centers this year to do face-to-face interviews because of COVID-19. But under normal circumstances, your correctional services has 4 research meetings in a year. And then you have to check the dates already when you are doing your research proposal. Check the dates and pace yourself and say, you know what, after I have submitted my application for ethical clearance, I will in the meantime just look at what correctional services requires for me, complete the forms, get everything ready. They want your ID copy and letter from your supervisor. Ask your supervisor to, in the meantime, write that letter for you. And so they basically just want a lot of things like annexures and all of that, complete all the necessary forms. And then when you receive your ethical clearance, then you are ready. Then you submit your proposal, because they also want your proposal. You submit your proposal together with all the documents or the forms that they want, together with the ethical clearance letter from the university or your college. You submit it before their closing date. You choose a date. I know they've got a date in September, I think in April, and in December also. So depending on when you get your ethical clearance, let's say you get it in August, then you are still in time to submit it to correctional services before their closing date in September. That is part of preparation for your data collection or your semi-structured interviews. So make sure that all that preparation is in order. And as soon as you have, after the research ethics for correctional center has sat down and they have analyzed all the application, they'll come back to you. Sometimes they'll say, you know what, this topic is over-researched under correctional services. We suggest that you study this topic. So you go back, speak to your supervisor, and then be like, okay, they asked me to tweak the topic, you tweak it, you resubmit to them, and then they approve. Sometimes they will approve immediately. And then, but sometimes also the language that you use, like for correctional services, is also very important. You probably would have noticed that I kept on correcting myself when I said prison or when I said prisoner. So we no longer use terms like prison or prisoner. The prisons are now called correctional services because the central aim of the prison is now to correct behavior, to rehabilitate your offenders. We also don't call them prisoners any longer, we call them offenders. So if you've used language like prison, prisoner, and all of that, bandit, they will ask you that, please can you change the language so that it speaks to the central aim or the purpose of correctional services. Then you do all the corrections that they've requested you to make and you resubmit. I know this sounds like, yo, this is a lot, but when you prepare, your path, your research path will be as smooth as possible. Yes, you are going to obviously experience some hurdles. You're going to have to like jump through some hoops, but that is the game of the research. You have to be patient and you have to be very flexible. So you've got your permission for correctional services or for whichever organization. For the police, SAPS also has their own process. You also have to apply with SAPS in order for you to be able to get permission to conduct research with the police. So you schedule your appointments. Then you've decided, obviously, in your research proposal, whether it's going to be a one-on-one interviews or whether it's going to be your group interview or a focus group. And then also now, obviously, in times of COVID, we cannot do face-to-face interviews any longer. But maybe now on level 1, the university will allow us. I'm not too sure what the situation is at the moment, but I know that the university has actually had distributed a research statement to say that we can't do face-to-face interviews any longer. So you need to also decide, obviously, on how your interviews are going to be conducted. Is it going to be face-to-face? Is it going to be self-administered? Is it going to be via Zoom? Is it going to be via Teams? There's a research that I'm doing, that I'm involved with at the moment, is commissioned by USAID, and I'm conducting it with the University of Cape Town. So when we started with our research last year, I was doing face-to-face interviews, but with my last research participants, which I had to interview around July, I had to change my interview, the format in which I was going to do the interviews. The previous ones I did face-to-face, but these ones I couldn't. So I ended up doing them over the phone, and some I did them over Zoom. Like I said, you need to be flexible. When we started, we were doing face-to-face interviews, but then COVID hit, and then I had to change to Zoom or Teams or over the phone. So you call the interviewee the day before to confirm, to build rapport also with participants. Mr. Machila?
Yes, Dr. Thobane?
I see it's like 9:54 already. Would you be able to allow me a little bit of extra time? Because we're also obviously going to have the Q&A session afterwards.
Yeah, I don't see it as a problem.
Okay, all right.
Also get the comments from the floor. But
okay, please just ask if they do have a bit of extra time, so that we do not rush through the session.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So you call the interviewee the day before to confirm. So obviously with the correctional services, what I used to do is that I went inside. The ethics committee from correctional services will allocate you an internal guide, and then you speak to your guide. Your guide will take you to the people that you're going to interview. You speak to them. Some of them will say, no, you can interview me immediately. And then others will be like, no, come back tomorrow. So because remember, you are looking for information. So whatever that the interviewees are telling you are comfortable with, you do what they are comfortable with. So, and then you build rapport with participants. Rapport is very important. You need to build a relationship with your participant if you want to get the most out of your participant. And then print out all your interview material beforehand. Don't leave it to the last minute, because technology has a way of disappointing us where we need it the most. So don't say, okay, my interviews are starting at 10, so I'll arrive at the office at 9 and then I'll do printouts. What happens when you get to the office and then the printer doesn't work? Then it's a problem. So try to prepare ahead of time so that you do not perform poorly or to avoid disappointments. And ensure that all your devices are in a good working condition. So when we do interviews, in most cases, we use your tape recorder or your voice recorder, obviously with the permission of your research participants. And you would have also obviously written this in your research proposal that you are going to record your interviews. But you still have to ask for further permission when you are requesting for consent from your interviewees or from your participants to record. Some people do not like being recorded, and you need to respect that. So when they say that they do not want you to record, then this means that you're going to have to try and capture as much information as possible through writing. So the point of recording also is to make sure that, I mean, an interview is supposed to be a conversation, you know, a conversation, and it needs to flow between you and the interviewee. So recording allows you to give your participant attention. But if it's not possible to record, then you need to write as much as you can. So I spoke about rapport or connection with your research participants. Rapport is very, very, very important. Be humble. Your research participants are the experts, not you. You are not an expert at all. I'm a doctor. I am not an expert. I've got the PhD. I'm not an expert. So if you were the expert on the subject, you wouldn't be conducting the interviews. So for the mere fact that you are doing research, it means you know nothing about that topic. You know nothing about the phenomenon. And the people that you are conducting research with, the people that you are asking for information from, are the experts. So humility cannot be emphasized enough where research is concerned. Like right now, we are also trying to transform our research methodologies. And we are saying that, conservative research according to like the Western perspective and not the African perspective. When you go into the field, you go into the field as a knower. I know this. I am a subject matter expert. But where transformative research paradigms are concerned, we say that there needs to be, that power dynamic between the researcher and the researchee or the participant. We need to get rid of that. We need to be in a situation where you and the researched or the research subjects are equals. So participants need to play an equal role in your research. They need to be able to be in a position where you are allowing them to make decisions. You are there collecting information from them. They are the experts. So be humble. Humility will take you a very long way where research is concerned. And then, okay, building rapport, there's like different ways in which you can build rapport, and rapport allows your participants to give you as much information as possible. So be accommodating. When you arrive for your research, introduce yourself, ask participants about their well-being, their work, small talk. Don't just shoot, go straight into the research questions. No, don't do that. Be humane. And then attain consent from the participant before you start with the interview. Remember, you've got your informed consent form. Make sure that you have consent before you start with the interview. And also, like I said, ask permission to record the interview. Do not just record without getting consent to record the interview. And then you also need to be aware, need to be aware of your body language, so the way you sit, you smile, crossed arms, yawning. You can't be yawning while you are talking to your participant. Okay, sometimes I know it's uncontrollable, but look interested, when you are talking to your research participants. And if maybe the interviews are being done in your office, remove barriers between you and the participant. Like if there's like chairs in between you guys, there's clutter on the desk, etc. Remove all of that so that the environment is as friendly as possible. But we usually advise that we try to do interviews at the place that is comfortable for the research participant. So if the research participant is comfortable to come to your office, then it's fine. But when you are doing your research, make sure that you do not inconvenience your participant. Do not inconvenience them. If they're saying you must come to my home, go to their homes as long as it's safe, obviously, for you to do so. If they're saying let's meet in a restaurant or in my office, you do that. As long as it's safe, obviously, for you to do that. Dress appropriately. So I'll make an example of the correctional services, for example. As a woman, when I went in, or as women researchers, when we go in the male correctional centers, they'll tell you that try to wear clothes that are not too revealing. Try not to wear a dress. You can wear pants, but make sure that you are not wearing pants that are too tight, or if they are tight, your top is long enough, to hide your African assets. Do not wear a top that shows a cleavage and all of that, because remember, these guys do not see females a lot besides their female correctional, the female correctional officials in the center, and probably their families on weekends when they're coming to do visitations. So you need to dress appropriately. So you need to know your context, and this is where our indigenous research methodologies also emphasize that context is very important. And that is why also where research is concerned, context is important. Some of the methodologies that are Western do not work for us in the African context. So make sure that whatever methodology you use works in the context where you are in. I used an example of correctional services being a hard to access population. So that context is very important when you choose methodology. If you go, for example, with the research that I'm doing now on gender-based violence, the one commissioned by USAID, I work in very rural communities. I work in KZN, I work in Mpumalanga province. context is very important in those areas where I go in. Yes, I'm Black, but Black people are not homogeneous. Black communities are not homogeneous. As I go into those communities, I make sure that I respect their culture. I make sure that my research is contextual. And also, like I said, I spoke about relationships, build relationships. Just because you're Black and you're going into Black communities, it doesn't mean that you know what's going on in that community, especially if you do not live in that community. Just because you're white and you're going into a white community, it doesn't mean that you understand that specific community. So build relationships with community members. You know, indigenous research or transformed research is based on building relationships. If it's even necessary for you to get like a person who's going to be your cultural guide or a person who's going to navigate you through the community, do that in order to make sure that you respect context and the culture in that specific community where you are interviewing. Like I said, show interest also when where your participants are concerned. So the two different types of interviewing where, hello?
Yeah, sorry to interject. I just wanted to let you know that we have received permission to proceed, so you may take your time and not rush the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I was actually about to rush. Okay, so I'll just then take a little bit of my time. So we've got two different types of qualitative interview methods or in-depth or semi-structured interview methods. The first one being your focus group discussion, and we also have in-depth interviews or your one-on-one interviews. So your focus group discussions are group discussions intended to identify the beliefs and opinions of a selected group of people on a specific topic. So when you are doing focus groups, you're basically going to be interviewing a group of people together. Sorry, let me just take a sip of the tea. So you are studying a specific topic or a phenomenon. So we can go back maybe to the topic where you are interviewing Unisa students about the support that Unisa offers them during COVID-19. You decide, you know what, I'm not going to do one-on-one interviews. I'm going to group the students into different focus groups. Then you facilitate your interviews in the group. So the rule with focus groups is that although we don't have exactly a number of how many people must be in a focus group, but the rule of thumb is between 8 and 10 people, because you want to make it as manageable as possible. You don't want to have like 20 people in a focus group and you can't manage the group. So you need to be able to manage the group. And also in a focus group, what is very important, you need to be very skilled also, or you need to practice, you need to learn on how this research method or this way of collecting data is can be facilitated in order for you to be able to receive as much data as possible. Remember, in the group, you'll have those people who are very well spoken, people who really love, you know, the sound of their voices and they will speak all the time. And you find people who don't speak a lot in the group. So just make sure that there's a balance in the group, because if there is no balance, then the data that you have collected is not going to be representative of the entire group if you only let 2 people speak in the group. Make sure that all 10 people have an equal chance of of speaking on the phenomena or the topic. The people who speak the most, make sure that those ones do not overpower people who don't talk. So going back to transformative research methodologies or indigenous research methodologies, in the African culture, I mean, we've had like, lekgotlas, where you go in the community, when there's like community issues, they'll be taken to the lekgotla. So like, obviously people in the lekgotla have to give each other time to like present their cases and stuff. So when you do this, just think of the lekgotla. So there's an example of what is called like a talking circle, that people need to be given an opportunity to be able to talk. So I did this course a couple of years ago. No, it was actually, yeah, in 2018. And they gave us this other stick. I don't remember what it's called. They gave us this other stick and they said, okay, you only talk when the stick is in your hand. But if you don't have the stick in your hand, you are not going to talk. So you can just have rules, establish rules and say, okay, in this lekgotla, this is how we are going to conduct the lekgotla, so that you don't get only one person speaking all the time. So it's very important that you prepare for this ahead of time also on how you are going to facilitate the whole thing. And then you've got your in-depth interviews or your one-on-one interviews. These ones are much easier in comparison to a focus group because you are speaking to a single person. So obviously the conversation will flow better between two people. You don't have to manage a lot of people here. It's just one person. So the in-depth interviews or the one-on-one discussions are designed to provide a detailed picture of an individual participant's views about the area of interest. So remember the focus group discussion, it's a view of a group, you know, on a specific topic. But this one, the one-on-one, is the individual's point of view or the perspective on the topic. So where interviews are concerned, as an interviewee or as a person who's collecting the data, be careful not to do the talking or all the talking. Remember, your research participants are the ones who are supposed to be doing all the talking. Yes, it is a conversation between two people, but you are here to collect information or data from the research participants. So they need to do a lot of the talking. So your role where this is concerned is for you to probe, you know, in order obviously to facilitate richer information from your participants. You probe, you know, if a person says, yeah, no, I feel that Unisa doesn't care for us as students. You don't just write, okay, the student says Unisa does not care for us as students. No, you say, okay, why do you say Unisa does not care for you as students? Then the student will be like, no, it's because since COVID-19, I feel they have not given us enough support. We don't have data. We don't have this. You know, I'm trying to get hold of Mr. Machila. He's not responding to his emails and whatever and stuff like that. So you are getting like in-depth, detailed, you know, picture of why the student feels that Unisa does not care for them or Unisa is not giving them enough support. So your job is to probe, but not to talk, you know, more than the research participant. The participant must do all the talking. And then going back also to your indigenous research methods, or when you go into communities to do research. I know the issue of language is a very sensitive one, but language is very important and we cannot emphasize this enough. What the research that I'm doing right now with USAID, I go into communities, you know, Black communities, and English is not their first language. So this is very important also to consider when you think about data collection. So, for example, 2 of the sites are in KwaZulu-Natal, one in KwaMashu and one in KwaNdengezi. So obviously the language that they are comfortable with is Zulu. So for me, it was obviously a bit easier because I'm Black. Although I'm not Zulu, I'm able to understand a lot of the South African official languages. So when I was on site, so we're doing 3 provinces, Gauteng, Mpumalanga, and KwaZulu-Natal. The first thing that I told my participants is that speak in the language that you are comfortable in or comfortable with. So it doesn't help you forcing your participants, and especially if you are Black, for example, and you are doing research in Black communities. For our white colleagues, it's understandable that it might be a little bit difficult for you to say, speak in your language. It's going to make communication a little bit difficult, but I'll speak about a solution where that is concerned. So when I went into the field, the first thing I did before I started with the interview, I explained the interview guide or the interview schedule is in English. I will read out the questions in English. If you do not understand them, I will explain them in vernacular, and then in your response, you do not have to respond in English. If you feel that you want to respond in your mother tongue, respond in your mother tongue. Reason being that people express themselves better in their home language. It doesn't help you wanting a person to speak to you back in English, but they cannot express themselves. You will not get rich data, especially if the point is for you to get rich data from the participant. If you are Black and you understand a lot of the African languages, let participants respond in their language. Have a conversation with them in the language that they understand. So where maybe our white counterparts are concerned, I know it's a bit difficult because probably you don't know other African languages besides or other South African official languages besides English and Afrikaans. So what I did when I went into KZN, okay, GP was easy because I mean, in Gauteng, we speak all 11 official languages in one. So it was really easy to be able to connect with all my research participants because we speak the same language. We speak Sotho, Setswana, Sepedi, English, Afrikaans in one. So we are all able to understand each other. Mpumalanga, we were in Bombela, they speak Seswati. So I told them, speak your language. I don't speak Seswati, but I do understand Nguni. You know, I understand a bit of Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, Seswati, Ndebele. Speak your language. KZN was a bit hectic because there they speak Zulu, like proper Zulu. So what I had to do, especially in KwaMashu, one of the community partners who are assisting us in this research accompanied me to my interviews. Remember, I spoke about getting a cultural guide. That's very important. If you are going to go into communities that are going to be a bit difficult, get a guide to help you out in that community. So this, so I had one of my colleagues in the community partner who works for the community partner that mobilizes the research participants for us. So, and he lives, I mean, in that community. He understands the context, he understands the language, he understands the culture in that community. So I went with him. He basically accompanied me to all the interviews so that where I'm stuck, he can actually explain better in Zulu. I speak Zulu, but my Zulu is broken. He speaks proper Zulu, so then he's able to explain to the research participants what I mean when I say 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's what I meant earlier on when I said a cultural guide is very important. But what the cultural guide also does for you, it helps you to observe the culture of that community. You cannot go into people's communities and not respect their culture. That's very important. An example also with the same research that I'm doing in KwaZulu-Natal. In Kwandengezi, it's one of the rural areas in KwaZulu-Natal. So when I went, I mean, the first time, we were part of the research is also to do workshops with the community members. I was facilitating workshops. It was like a week-long workshop, and I was wearing pants when I was facilitating the workshops. And on Friday, on the last day of the workshop, I decided to wear a dress instead of pants. You will not believe how happy and excited my research participants were. They complimented me. They're like, yeah, now you look like a woman, whatever type of a thing. I know that might sound like, no, that's patriarchal. But remember, in their culture, they would prefer for a woman to wear a dress. Whether you agree or you don't agree, it's none of their business. And you need to observe their culture. So then that actually helped me. I realized that, oh, okay, so this community actually prefers it if I wear skirts or if I wear pants when I address them. So from that day, whenever I go back to Kwandengezi, I pick dresses and skirts only. That's all I wear when I go there because that's what they prefer. So that might sound like, no, it's something very small and mundane, but it's big when it comes to them and their culture. And another thing that a cultural guide is going to help you with, they will help you with what you can do and what you can't do in that community where culture is concerned. Because sometimes we go into communities, as researchers, we think we know it all. We think we know these people. Just because I'm a doctor, just because I'm Black, I understand Black people, but I don't understand Black people. I live in Pretoria and I do not live in Kwandengezi. So like I said earlier on, Black people are not homogeneous. So I can't go with that mentality that, no, I know it all and all of that. No, I don't. I know Black people in Soshanguve. I know what being Black in Soshanguve is because I'm from Soshanguve. But I do not know what, yes, obviously I do have an overall idea, of our culture. And that's where I have an advantage, as a Black person. But there are other things that are done in that community that I'm not aware of. And the cultural guide will make me aware of that. So that's also just a tip for our white counterparts that if you are going to do research in Black communities, get somebody who's going to assist you as a cultural guide. If it also means that your interview guides need to be translated, do that. If it means that as a white researcher, you're going to need somebody to go on the field with you, and in instances where your research participants cannot speak English, then this person can assist you to translate or to interpret what you are saying to a research participant. Do that. Do that, and when you respect people like that, you will be able to get a lot of information. Remember, our transformative research paradigms are centered on the principle of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is very important when you go into the research field. It's extremely important. You need to show humanity for other human beings. And that's the only way that you are going to be able to get as much information as possible. And then, so just the pros and cons of both in-depth interviews and focus group discussions. Where one-on-one or in-depth interviews are concerned, your pros are, it may be a better method to use for sensitive topics such as condom use, or in my field of work, let's say I'm doing research on gender-based violence, I cannot be interviewing victims in a group. If I'm going to ask you about to tell me your story of how you are being abused by your partner, I cannot do this in a focus group because it is a sensitive topic. Like I said in the beginning, your topic must drive you. Your topic needs to drive you on what method you must choose. Going back on topic and on transformative research paradigms or methods, I know we are studying to get our qualifications, either be your master's or your PhD. But I advise my students all the time that do not just choose a research topic if it's not relevant. Your research topic must be relevant to context. First of all, obviously context, South African context or the African context. You can't just choose a research topic or methodology just because the Westerners are using it. Context is not the same, and it's not going to fly in South Africa. And also, when you choose a research topic, do not just choose a topic just to get a qualification. So gone are those days when researchers are going into the communities, they're just getting information, they are leaving communities and they're not making any difference in those communities. We need to arrive at a point where, even though the purpose of your study is for you to get your master's or your PhD qualification, make sure that somehow the community where you are conducting your research benefits. Don't be the only person who's benefiting from this research. And I'm not saying you must do groundbreaking research, I know, and especially if you're doing masters, we're not expecting you to change the world, but don't be selfish. It's not all about just you getting your qualification. It's about also the community where you are doing your research. They need, and I know you probably might say, no, but then where ethics are concerned, we can't promise our research participants anything they're not supposed to be benefiting. Yes, you can't promise them money and all of that, but your topic needs to be relevant to them. Don't just go to communities and do research on topics that are not relevant to them. They need to benefit from your research. So another pro where the in-depth interviews are concerned is there's no need to book a venue or schedule an entire group to attend one event. So where focus groups are concerned, the issue of coordination, might be a problem where this person is available on this date, another person is available on another date. So you find it difficult to get the entire group to participate at the same time. You also need to arrange venues because, you are interviewing a group of people. You can't just interview them in a small office. You probably need to book a boardroom or a hall or something like that. So, but the advantage of your one-on-one interviews is that you don't need to do any of that. You can just go to a place that's convenient for your research participant. In-depth interviews are private. Like I said, if you are going to do research on very sensitive issues, they need to be as private as possible. So you can't do them in a group setting. It allows more time to explore topics per person. So unlike focus group discussions, if you have a focus group scheduled for an hour, and you probably won't get as much information from everybody. But if you have a one-on-one interview scheduled for an hour, you're going to get a lot of information because you're talking to only one person. And then it also can yield more detailed answers from the people. And what happens sometimes in a group setting is that people are sometimes shy, to talk about certain issues. So you find that whereas this person could have given you a detailed answer in a one-on-one setting, in a group setting, they are unable to give you that detailed answer because they're probably shy to reveal some information. So you need to be the judge that, if I'm looking for this kind of information, will I receive this information in a one-on-one setting or in a group setting? And then you decide which method would be suitable for your research. The cons of in-depth or one-on-one interviews is that it's more expensive per person than conducting a focus group, discussion. Obviously, if you are going to interview individuals, you'll be driving around to different places. If you have to interview 10 people, you are driving around to 10 different places to interview 10 people. And it takes more time than focus groups. So then speaking of focus group discussions, then the pros, it allows for group interaction and for people to build off others' answers. Sometimes when you are in a one-on-one setting, you forget some stuff, but when you are in a group setting, somebody says something that triggers an answer that you will provide. Then they remind you that, oh yeah, and there's also this and that. And then new ideas or insights are more likely to emerge as a result of a group exchange, and then less time that it would take to interview the same number of people one by one. So here, as opposed to one-on-one interviews, you drive to 10 different places to interview 10 different people. But in a focus group discussion, you've got the 10 people in one place. You don't have to drive to any of them. You drive into only one place. And then it's a good way to access social norms. So if you are studying, let's use the gender-based violence research, for example, you want to study how social norms contribute to gender-based violence. You'll be able to get good answers, in a group discussion. You will be in that community, that specific community that you are studying, and you are able to see what norms are prevalent in that specific community by having this focus group discussion. And then the cons where focus groups are concerned, it requires more logistics to schedule and plan things like finding a venue and a time that works for more people. I've explored that and explained that already. And then the moderator must have training or skills at managing group interaction. And I did explain this in detail when I introduced your focus group discussions. You need to have training, you need to have skills. There's nowadays information is everywhere. If it's possible, watch YouTube videos on how one manages a group interaction, on how one can facilitate a focus group interaction. Be prepared, be prepared. And then sensitive topics such as sexual practices may be hard for people to talk about in the presence of others, and so may be better explored in a private one-by-one interview. And then on this one, on focus groups also, the negative side of it or disadvantage is that it's very hard to hear voices and transcribe when in a group setting. Remember, after you've collected your data, you've got your transcripts, your interview transcripts and all of that you've written or you've recorded, you've got your voice recordings. In order for you to be able to start your data analysis, the first step is for you to go and transcribe. Transcribing basically means that you just put your earphones on and listen to your recording and type exactly what your participants are saying on Word. So you are basically just repeating what they're saying word for word. That's much easier when you are doing a one-on-one interview. But when you are doing a group discussion, transcription might be a little bit difficult because you have to locate different voices. You have to remember that, okay, this is this and that person. So you obviously have to have a sharp memory to remember that, oh no, this was said by this research participant. This was said. So if you have 10 people, you have to be able to recognize all 10 voices when you are doing the transcription. You can't transcribe the interviews as one or as one voice, because the different voices have to also still come out of your focus group discussion. So it may be a little bit hard to hear voices and transcribe when in a group setting. So like I've explained, you'll see like after we've gone through the pros and cons, then you'll be able to decide. You can see that, okay, this method is going to work better for my research. This method is much more feasible for me, given the time that I have to complete my master's degree or my PhD, also given the resources that I have. I mean, if you have funding and you can travel the whole of South Africa, you can do that. But if you are funding your own research, then obviously you have to limit your study to a certain province. You can just do only Gauteng province, or even to a certain city, and just do Pretoria or Polokwane only because of feasibility issues. So yeah, that's basically the end of today's presentation. And thank you very much for lending me your ears and for giving me your attention. I'm ready for the question and answer session, Mr. Malachi. Thank you very much.
We have I've grouped this into 8. First, let me ask the attendees for allowing you to proceed, even if the time was not on our side. There were questions out of today's scope, and I have sent in an email so that those students can access the workshop and themes that we did on those themes. Dr. Thobane, we got positive feedback. People are saying the workshop was excellent, and it evoked some mixed emotion because some are submitting proposal, and I'm glad that you emphasize that as long as your objectives and aim are not changing, you can always update the ethics committee. Thank you for emphasizing that. Secondly, there were comments on how this COVID thing has changed. And I'd like to thank Lebogang for the contribution that you make in the background. So Helen, rest assured that yes, things are flexible, and we'll make sure that we attach the guidelines that Dr. Thobane was talking about that they were recently published. Now, getting to the questions, Dr. Thobane. The first one, they need you to clarify the difference between stratified random sampling and cluster random sampling. So that is the first one, and it will be followed by the 3 or 4. Thank you.
Like I said, when I explained, so your stratified sampling, I'll just first explain what stratified sampling and then what stratified random sampling is. So it means that, when a population has a mixed characteristics, like I explained before, and you want to ensure that every characteristic is proportionally represented in the sample. So you divide your sample into subgroups, or what we call strata. That is where stratified sampling comes from. So you divide your population into subgroups based on the relevant characteristics. For example, gender, age, income, or job role. So let's say you are studying a specific community and you decide that in that community, you are going to divide the population into the different strata. So you've got the population already, then you divide them into gender, you divide them into age, you divide them into income or job role. And then from those different subgroups or stratum, you've got 4 stratum. From the overall proportions of the population, you calculate how many people should be sampled from each subgroup. So let's say you have a population, I'll keep on using 1,000. In that population, there's 1,000 people. And you've divided the 1,000 people into 4 subgroups. Then from the 4 subgroups, you use random or systematic sampling to select a sample from each subgroup. So that is where random stratified sampling comes from. You've got 4 stratums or 4 strata, 4 subgroups. They each have different characteristics. You have a subgroup for race, you have a subgroup for age, you have a subgroup for income, you have a subgroup for job role, but you're not going to be choosing everybody from all the different subgroups. So then you must choose then the number of people you want in your sample. So let's say it's 100 that you want. Then from each of the subgroup, you can say, I'm going to use random sampling in order for me to choose 25 from each subgroup. Remember, population is 1,000, you want 100. You have 4 subgroups or 4 strata, then you choose 25 from each. You can either do it randomly or you can do it systematically. So as I explained earlier on that, your simple random sampling, you basically just give people numbers and then you choose randomly the different numbers. I use the example of a hat. So that's what your random stratified sampling is. You've got strata, and then once you've got the strata, you randomly choose people to be part of your sample from the strata that you have. And then I think you said the other one was what? Random cluster sampling.
Yes.
Okay, so it's almost similar, but here your groups are already, where cluster sampling is concerned, your population is already divided into clusters. So you are not dividing anything. So there where the stratified sampling is concerned, you are doing the division yourself into subgroups. But cluster sampling, you don't do any dividing. I'll use Unisa, for example. Unisa has different clusters or different departments. The departments are already there. I use an example of the School of Criminal Justice. We already have 3 clusters under the School of Criminal Justice. We've got policing, we've got correction management, we've got the Department of Criminology and Security Science. So already you've got clusters under that School of Criminal Justice. Then from the clusters, the 3 clusters that you have, you want a sample. Then you randomly select a sample from the 3 clusters that are already there. That's what random cluster sampling basically means. I hope I was able to answer the question, Mr. Machila.
Thank you, Dr. Thobane. It was clear, and I hope we'll get a response confirming that. Now, moving to the second group, there was discussion around size matters in research and all that. Yeah. The first one was on convenience sampling. So they want to know how can they determine the size when doing convenience sampling. Thank you.
So it all depends on your method, your methodology, whether it is a quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method. So convenience, like I said, remember when I spoke about whether you are using probability or non-probability, it's not cast in stone. In most cases, they tell you that no, for what do you call it, for quantitative research, you must use probability. But no, you can also use non-probability or convenient sampling in this case, where quantitative research is concerned. So the number, you can't say that what number is appropriate. Like I said when I was doing the presentation on size matters, or on your sampling size, it all depends on obviously your objective, and it all depends also on your research method. So you can't like choose 20 people and say that it's quantitative. It's not really going to pass as quantitative, you know, but 20 people qualifies as qualitative, you know. So where convenient sampling is concerned, for my PhD, I'll use that example. I was doing mixed method. So, and one of my sampling methods, I used different, you can also use different subtypes of sampling for one research. So you don't have to get to stick to one one sampling method. Example is, let's say you are using purposive sampling, and then you purposely choose, maybe you only know 5 people who have knowledge in that topic. So you use purposive sampling to select those people. And then when you have the 5 people, obviously you are still looking for more people. Then you further use snowballing to ask the 5 people to refer more people in order for you to be able to sample those people also. So going back to the example of my PhD, one of my research methods was convenient sampling. So I used mixed method, and I was doing interviews, and I also did surveys, you know, questionnaires. And what I did was that I distributed questions at shopping malls. I went to shopping malls, obviously waited for the people to fill them in and then give them back to me immediately. I went to taxi ranks. I went to different places. We also had an online survey, which we distributed on WhatsApp groups. That's also convenient sampling, because you conveniently sending to the people that are already your friends on WhatsApp group. Distributed to them, distributed the link on Facebook, and all different types of, you know, social media where I was able to distribute this link. So I ended up with, what was the number? I think it was about 100, not 150. Okay, I think I can't remember what the exact number was, but the point that I'm trying to make is, I cannot tell you what is the right sample size. I can't. Your research will tell you what the right sample size is. The information that you've collected will tell you what the right sample size is. So the issue of size, it depends on, firstly, the methodology that you'll be using, and secondly, your objective. If you feel that the number that you have so far, they have given you what you are looking for, then you can stop. Like I said, you know, the issue of data saturation where qualitative research is concerned. So yeah, it's like I said, it's a decision that you have to make, but whatever decision that you make sure that you are able to substantiate why you are choosing that sample size, why that number or the sample size is enough or is deemed feasible for your research. I hope I was able to answer that one.
Thank you, Dr. Thobane. It was clear. And something that I want to confirm, from 10 o'clock, we still have a full class, only 5 people logged out. So thank you for staying in. Still on the size matter issue, we have a question from someone who's busy with their proposal, and they are at the sampling stage. So they are doing a quantitative study. Now they realize that their population size is 252. So they're not sure whether to continue with the quantitative study or not. But from the explanation that you gave earlier on, that depending on objectives of your study and everything, I think the study will determine their sample size. I'm not sure if you want to address it, but I feel you did, but I'll hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, really, 250 people, yes, you can still conduct a quantitative study with 250 people. And like I said, there isn't a cast in stone answer on the percentage that you must take from the population. 250, you can do 100 people out of the 250. So like I said, as long as you are able to explain why you are using that, why that size is enough, then you are fine. Yeah, with 250, you can comfortably do a quantitative study. So going back to my PhD research, so where my surveys are concerned, I distributed surveys to 500 people. Yeah, so my surveys were completed by 500 people, and the population that I was studying was the entire country, because I was doing my research on bank following robberies. So I wanted my surveys to be filled in by any adult in South Africa who has a bank account. So that was basically my unit of analysis. So like I said, I did use convenience sampling. Some people, I had to go to the shopping malls to give them the surveys. I went to taxi ranks also, and then other people completed the surveys online. So I did 500 people, and somebody might be like, no, but South Africa is a very big population, why only 500? But I was able to explain in my PhD thesis why 500 was enough for my specific research. I gave the reasons. And also, like you see, I mean, it's a big number, 500, so it can be qualitative. Then it's quantitative if it's 500.
Thank you, Dr. Thobane. Positive feedback is still coming in. We also have a large number of our students in the Ethiopia Learning Center. So thanks again to all for attending. Now moving to the next theme on questions, relationship building and building rapport. The first one, they need your advice. When do you start looking for participants whom you like to add to your study?
As soon as you have your ethics clearance, that's when you can start. But obviously when you are writing your research proposal, if you do know your population, you already have people in mind, but you obviously cannot reach out to them until you have ethical clearance. So while you are already doing your proposal, you already have in mind the kind of people that you are going to be interviewing or who you are going to be asking to fill out the survey. But asking participants to take part in your study, you only do that as soon as you have your ethical clearance. That's when you can make contact. So the issue of rapport takes place in different ways. It depends also on your context. If you are going to go to the correctional center, you're not going to be going back a lot of times. So you have to build rapport on the day that you are collecting research. So the whole building relationships thing doesn't mean that you have to take weeks and months and all of that to build relationships. Yes, you can take weeks and months to build relationship with your gatekeeper. Your gatekeeper being your internal guide at the correctional services, the person who's allocated to you to assist you to be able to draw out your sample. So that person, you'll probably spend a lot more time with them because they're going to be navigating you through the system. So you build rapport so that this person will be able to assist you to get the right people. And where in a different setting, maybe let's say you are doing research in your communities. With the research that I'm doing now on gender-based violence, I've actually built rapport. I started in July last year. But remember, the research that I'm doing now, it's not for my studies. So I've got time, obviously, to build rapport and all of that because I'm not in a rush to receive a qualification. So I started last year. We started, obviously, before I started conducting interviews, the first methods of engaging or building rapport with my research participants took place in a workshop setting. So I sat in workshops, engaged in workshops with my research participants. Obviously, I did observations in those workshops and stuff. And only later did I start doing face-to-face interview. But then by that time, I had very great relationship with my research participants because I was spending time with them in workshops. So there's different ways in which you can build rapport. In our instance, where you are studying for a graduate qualification, you don't have the luxury of time like I do now with the specific research, which is not for my studies. You can build rapport on the day when you are conducting your research. Like I said, I use like different examples of how to do that. You must greet your participants. You know, I mean, I spoke about the issue of Ubuntu, you know, greet your participants, ask your participants about your well-being. And you know, even during the interview, you can pause in between the interview and you can, just relax, speak about something. Like, for example, when I was interviewing the guys in the prison, in the correctional centers, not the prisons, some of them were from Soshanguve that I was interviewing. And, you know, when they said, yeah, no, I grew up in Soshanguve, I lived in Block LL, I was like, oh, by the way, I'm from Soshanguve. Then we paused, then we speak about Sosha. And it's like, but how's Sosha right now? Because the last time I was outside was like 20 years ago. I'm sure it's big now, ne? What's going on in Soshanguve? So those kind of conversations, and then when you are done, obviously not a lengthy 1 hour long conversation, but in between chatters, you have like small chatters which are helping you to build rapport. And then I spoke about, you know, respect and humility are very important in building rapport. When I went into the correctional centers, I did not go into the centers with an attitude. I do not go into the centers and disrespected the offenders and treated them like deboshwa or whatever and all of that. I was very respectful. I treated them as the people who are knowledgeable in the subject, and they are the ones who committed those crimes. So they are the experts, they are knowledgeable. You know, there's people that I interviewed who were really old. Like, I think one of them was like almost in his 70s. And when I was referring to him, I'd call him Papa, you know, to show him that respect, you know. I don't go there and call him by his first name. We don't do that. That's not how we were raised. That you don't do that as a black child. You know, that's not Ubuntu. You don't address the elders with their first name. So I was calling him Papa. And then the ones were like, you know, a little bit younger or just a bit older, you know, I'd call him Abuti or Brayaka or whatever, but just show them respect and you build rapport with them. And when you respect them, they will respect you in return and the interview is going to flow. I got so much information. People keep on asking me, they're like, but how are you able to solicit so much detailed information from offenders? Because offenders are very secretive. It's like I built rapport, I was humble, and I respected them. So that's the advice that I can actually give when you go out there into the research field. Be humble. You do not know anything. You are there because they are the experts and not the other way around.
As a supervisor, a brief advice on when should they apply for the ethical clearance? After they've done with the proposal or
during? Yes. You obviously cannot apply for ethical clearance while you are still busy with your research proposal. So I'll just use an example of our department and how our process goes. But anyway, across the entire university, you have to have your research proposal approved by your supervisor first before you can go on to the next stage of applying for your ethical clearance. So this is what happens in our department, the Department of Criminology and Security Science. So me and my students will work on the research proposal. We'll have a couple of drafts. Obviously, it depends on student, you know, each student is different. So the drafts will not be the same. One student, you will pass the proposal after 2 drafts, another one after 5. So we can't really compare students. So, but at the end, when the supervisor says, you know what, I'm happy with the research proposal, I think we can send it out. I think I can actually pass it, you know. What we do in our department, when I say I'm satisfied as a researcher, as a supervisor, then I will take the research proposal and submit it to our M&D coordinator. So we've got an M&D coordinator in our department. And then we also have a panel in our department of M&D supervisors. So what the coordinator would do, she will distribute the proposal after I have approved it to 2 colleagues in the M&D M&D team or the supervisor team. They will look at the proposal, and then once they have looked at it, the point of looking at it obviously is to better the proposal. Remember, me and the students are very invested in this document. It is our document. We might not see other things that another person who's not invested in the proposal will be seeing. So then, and also, research is in most cases not completely, objective. So, but at least now, when you are sending it to another person, they give you that objective feedback or something that you didn't see, an angle that you didn't see. They look at it, they comment on it, and then they will decide whether they are passing the proposal from the departmental point of view, or whether you need to work on some stuff before they can approve the proposal. So they bring it back to you. You'll have, for example, feedback like approved with minor changes or approved with major changes, or rejected, and then for you and the students to go back and do some work on it, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But once that approval phase from the department is done, then you know that your research proposal is almost watertight. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, but at least then it's gone through different eyes. Then once the department has approved it, then that's when we start applying for ethical clearance. Because it's important for you to apply for ethical clearance with an approved research proposal, because the ethical clearance committee are going to ask for a research proposal. So you can't apply for ethical clearance until it's done and approved, because you can't submit half a proposal. You must submit a proposal that is approved. Then obviously after that's approved, they're going to ask you obviously for the proposal that's been approved by the department. I know our law ethics committee will also ask for, and I think the same goes with other colleges in the department. They'll also ask you for like proof of registration, for example, your CV, your supervisor's CV, and a form, a very long form that you have to complete, and a checklist of everything else that you have to attach to your application. And then it goes through and you wait for a couple of weeks, and then you have your ethical clearance. But also, remember, the ethics committee is also looking for specific things in your research, especially where your ethics are concerned. So in your research proposal, you will have a section for ethics, and then you have to explain how you are going to deal with specific types of ethics. Let's take confidentiality, for example. You need to explain how you're going to make sure that your interviews are confidential. You need to explain how you're going to store your data. You need to explain who's going to have access to the data. You need to explain that what are you going to do with the data afterwards, and after how long are you going to destroy it, and how are you going to destroy it. So they look for all of that in your research proposal. And if they feel that they are satisfied that you have addressed the ethics issues, the ethical issues where your research is concerned, then they approve your ethics. But it is possible for ethics to be rejected, for your ethical clearance application to be rejected, based on the fact that maybe your research is a high-risk research. Research where you are going to be interviewing children, for example, abused children. There's extra ethical considerations that you need to put in mind. And if you do not have that highlighted in your ethical clearance and your research is high risk, then they are not going to approve. They will tell you obviously what you need to attain to, and you need to go back and work on it. The offender population, for example, it's also considered a vulnerable population, because remember, although offenders can give you consent, but considering the situation in which they are, they cannot give you full consent. So then you have to put all of that in your proposal and explain how you are going to make sure that they are not forced by correctional officers to take part in the research, for example. When all that is explained to the satisfaction of the ethics committee, then you receive your certificate. So obviously then that means you must be done with your proposal before you apply for ethical clearance.
Thank you, Dr. Thobane. I can hear notifications for your next appointments, but let's wrap this up.
Okay.
Students are appreciating the way you are answering these questions. Still on the relationship building. Now, here's a student. They've written all their chapters, and now they are going to collect data. And they are having a problem to gain access to participants, which is extremely difficult. So what's your advice on that?
That's yeah, that's real, hey? That happens and you must be ready for it. Hence I said relationship building is very important. There is an article that I wrote, but I'll also like to refer the students to my research or my dissertation, my master's dissertation, because I do explain the methodological challenges, issues of access and all of that. So I will send it to you also, and then maybe you can disseminate to students when you are sending the PowerPoint presentation. So with correctional services, for example, I got the letter that my research has been approved and I can go into the center, and then I got allocated an internal guide. But it was so difficult to get hold of my internal guide. Like, in correctional services, they don't usually answer the phones. So they give you the internal guides, landline. So I called like for weeks and I wasn't getting hold of my internal guide. I sent emails, I wasn't receiving, any responses or feedback from the internal guide, but I just kept on persisting. And maybe also the fact that I work for Unisa and I'm not a full-time student who's not employed, then it was a little bit easier because there are some other people that I know from the correctional services, So then I was able to speak to those people and they were able to assist me with gaining access. So access is not easy. And I do not want to come here and say, no, once you have your ethical clearance, it's going to be very easy for you to be able to gain access. So relationship building, like I said, I can't emphasize it enough that build relationships with the gatekeepers, and then that will facilitate access. So yeah, it's difficult, but you have to be patient. So I speak about patience also in the chapter where I speak about the methodological challenges of conducting research in the correctional services, but it applies also to other settings. So patience, and flexibility. Do not give up and keep on pestering. You just keep on pestering and pestering until your gatekeepers open the doors to you. And also, don't think just because you've gained access into the correctional center that you have gained access to your offenders or to the participants. You haven't. You still need further access when you are inside. Because what also happened with me was that, yes, now I was inside, and then I've got the names of people in the correctional center or the participants that are relevant for my research. And then I asked them, speak to them. I got so many rejections. Like I remember in Zonderwater, the correctional center in Cullinan. There, I think the least number of interviews were done in Zonderwater. That was my first center where I was doing the interviews. There were so many cash in transit robbery offenders, but I got so many rejections from them. So, like I said, when you are on the field, you also have to change your methods. So I realized that, I was getting so many rejections from there because the rule was that when I do the interviews, I must have the correctional officer with me in the office. But do you think offenders will speak when the correctional officer is also in the office? No. So then I asked the correctional officers that I do understand that for my safety, I can't be alone because I'm a woman, you know, also with the offenders in the office. But I realized that I'm getting rejections and they're not giving me enough information because you are sitting with me the whole time. How about you don't sit with me? I want to be in the office alone with them. But you can keep the door a little bit open so that every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, you can just come and then you can just check if I'm still okay. And in other correctional services centers, the doors, the offices that I was using, they had a glass like on the door where you can actually just peep and see if I'm still okay. And also keeping the door open should something happen. If I want to scream, I can scream because the door is open and then you'll be able to hear me. But, you know, luckily I didn't experience any issues, challenges when I was with offenders only inside, you know, in the office. They were very free. Like the minute the correctional official left the office, they started talking and told me so much information. So access, like I said, it's not only just gaining access into the building itself or the organization itself, even inside, when you are inside, you still have to gain further access to your participants. And like I said, relationships, relationships, relationships. Let me just quickly talk to that question about the language editor. It's very important to get a very good language editor for your dissertation. Or your thesis, somebody who's also going to do technical editing. Don't just go for anybody who says that they can offer you those services, because some people do not do a proper job. So get referrals. Your department where you are studying, usually they have a list of people that they use for editing. Ask your supervisor who they are using. We have a list, like in our department of criminology, we know that these are the people that we use and we also trust them because we've seen them doing the work before. So language editing is very important because as you are writing the dissertation, the most important thing is content. And then obviously the language editor has to come in at the end to make sure that the language is, you know, is proper, and then to make sure that also they've done the technical editing. So get somebody who does both language and technical editing, and not just the language only. A person who does technical editing does much more beyond just correcting the language. They also look at your references, because sometimes you miss like a list of references at the end. Then they can just help you and say, okay, I see this reference is cited in the text, but you haven't listed it at the end, or the other way around. So you need somebody like that, because it's small technicalities like that that can disadvantage you or make a difference between you getting a distinction and just a normal pass. So language editing and technical editing is also very important, but get somebody who comes highly recommended and qualified, not a person who's taking chances. Anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Machila, for the invitation. Thank you very much, colleagues and students, for lending me your ear today.